Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail 126 New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Paul Gray and Phyllis Tuchman. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. As managing partner of Gray, a leading international dealer in modern, post-war, and contemporary art located in New York and Chicago and founded in 1963, Paul Gray has been privileged to work closely with some of the most influential visual artists of our time. He has acted as advisor and consultant to prominent private collectors and museums around the world. Gray currently serves on the board of the global NGO Human Rights Watch. And our host today, critic and art historian Phyllis Tuchman, teaches and writes about art, particularly sculpture. She has taught at Williams College, Hunter College, and at the School of Visual Arts. She is also an editor at large for the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I will pass it over to Phyllis to get us started.
I'm just going to say very briefly, I hope everybody reads Jason Rosenfeld's article review of Nicole Eisenman's sculpture in the Brooklyn Rail. It's brilliant. So that's one thing I wanted to say. Paul, thank you so much for doing this. I used to love going to the gallery in Chicago, and then you opened a gallery up the block from me on 78th and Madison.
Yeah, we opened there in 97, I think.
Yeah. And do you do uh, uh, one person shows, or do you just specialize in showing wonderful classic modernism?
Well, the bulk of our public programming is our contemporary artist, one artist exhibitions. And we do more of them in Chicago than in New York. I mean, there are so many contemporary galleries in New York um, that quite a few of the artists that we represent in Chicago already have other representation in New York. But we do one artist shows in New York too. We did a historical one recently for Alexander Calder, works from the 1950s and 60s. And we have a couple of contemporary shows coming up, actually. We're going to do our first exhibition for an artist that we took on recently named Judy Ledgerwood in the New York Gallery I think in the spring.
And when you did the Calder show, it's quite amazing because
Phyllis, I think you muted yourself accidentally.
whoops,
There you
I'm
go.
yeah. Um, when you did the Calder show, it's kind of amazing because Calder did the sidewalk in front of your gallery.
Yeah, there's a long history there. His gallery for over 35 years was located in the building right next to us.
And as a graduate student, I was delighted because I actually saw Calder uh, in the process of dedicating the sidewalk,
Mhm.
and it survived.
I mean, it's surviving now thanks to Michael Bloomberg, who owns the building, the two buildings next to us, and who's been very generous in caring for it in a way that it hadn't been for a long time.
Oh my God. You know, I love the building that you're in because when I was in high school, I used to go to Seidenberg and other galleries in that building, and the great Wittenborn bookstore was on the second floor.
Yeah, it has a history, that building for sure.
That's amazing. So, okay, we're looking at these Calders. I'm going to go back and did you buy the Calders, not to be crude, but at auction through the estate? How did you get these gems?
Well, we did the exhibition in part because we had two works on consignment that we felt, were calling out to be contextualized and to be shown publicly, two works for sale. The works that you're seeing right now are both borrowed from private collections, things that we sold more than 30 years ago. I think if you switch to the other photograph of a large, yeah, those two works are the ones that I'm talking about. The one on the right, the large black one, was consigned to us from a museum which deaccessioned it, and so we sold it. And the one on the left came from a private foundation and was consigned to us for sale. That was sold last year also.
Oh my
Early
gosh.
this.
Can we go back to the beginning of the slides with the Abacanovich? So I'm curious about a number of things. You have a base in Chicago in the Windy City. Um, Most people think about New York or LA, but Chicago has a really vibrant art scene. But this is my question. Did you did you have to show a lot of figurative art there?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the market has ever dictated the programming of this gallery. My father showed the things he was passionate about, and if he could sell them, he did, and if he couldn't, he didn't. And both things happened. Probably more of the latter than the former. And the same thing is true for me. I can't represent and exhibit works that I'm not passionate about and that I can't articulate that personal conviction for. So we show figurative, abstract sculpture, paintings, drawings. We've had a very strong program in drawings and works on paper over the years. That was a real passion of my father's. In fact, when he stepped away from active involvement in the business in the early 90s, he spent the rest of his life collecting and ultimately giving away to museums his big collection of drawings.
Wow. So the gallery was founded more than 60 years ago.
1963, an
Wow.
artist, an artist friend of my father's convinced him that he would make a good art dealer. I think the artist wanted somebody to represent him, but he was a sculptor who worked primarily in welded steel, a man named Harry Boras. And in the summer of 63, my dad decided, just out of the blue to go rent a space on Ontario Street, where a few years later, the Museum of Contemporary Art was also founded and opened up a space. Harry Boras brought my dad to New York, introduced him to Martha Jackson and Bob Thompson, the painter, and a number of other people, de Kooning, Leo Castelli. I think he may have met Lichtenstein on that very first trip to New York. And he started building a program which was from the beginning a combination of European modernism, American mid-century abstract expressionism, pop art, which was, just beginning to, which was contemporary art of the moment. And we have always pursued a mixed program like that, feeling that, there's a lot of cross influence between artists, and why should there not be a way of contextualizing them in the same gallery space?
We're going a little too fast with the slides. Can we go back, please? Um, so Paul, did you spend a lot of time as a youngster at the Art Institute of Chicago?
I wouldn't say a lot of time, but the Art Institute is one of the chief reasons why why people think of Chicago as some sort of a significant art center. It's an extraordinary museum, like very, very few others in the world. It collects, all across the history of art making, from the beginning of the dawn of time to the present. And they have extraordinary collections, often including works donated by major collectors that gravitated to Chicago during the late 19th and early 20th century to be involved in industry primarily. But it
Uh,
was certainly influential. And in fact, I was at the Art Institute not that long ago visiting with some friends who had not been there before. And we revisited a few works of art that I could remember from my childhood.
well, just to start with the Grand Jatte, and how about the Great Kayabat street scene? And oh my God, two of the most beautiful Manets ever painted. Um, it's and we're not even talking about early Renaissance art. I mean, it goes way back.
Or abstract expressionism, I mean, they acquired, the Art Institute's contemporary art group acquired the major late 50s landscape painting that they own directly out of the studio at that time.
Really? They bought it from the studio?
Mhm.
Asheville.
Yes, right.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable. Um, and the food is good.
Really, I haven't eaten there in a long time.
Oh no, I like eating lunch there.
Oh,
Um,
that's right. They have a restaurant named after the architect who designed the addition, right? If I'm not mistaken.
that I don't remember, but I do remember the Ellsworth Kelly that's outside,
Mhm.
and the great Ellsworth Kellys upstairs on the second floor, that ring of space.
Yeah, they had a relationship with Kelly throughout a period of almost 40 years, I would say, collecting and commissioning like that piece in the garden outside and exhibiting right up to the present day director, James Rondo, who was very close to Kelly.
Huh. Um, now, th- is Binion, is his first name Arthur? I think I met him years ago.
Um, wow. MacArthur, not Arthur.
Oh, well, close.
Yeah, very close. MacArthur Binion is an artist whose career began really in New York in the late 60s. He was one of the minimalists who didn't get a lot of attention at the time, most likely because there wasn't much focus on artists of color at that time. Um, and he moved to Chicago in I think 1980 to take a teaching job and began showing his work there in the late 80s. He came to openings at our gallery all throughout the early years that I worked in the gallery. I think I started in 82 or 83, and I remember meeting him early on. He seemed like a larger than life character. But our relationship didn't begin till about a decade ago when he left his previous gallery. And I said, why not show with us? We've known each other for so long. So we've had 3 exhibitions so far and published a couple of books on his work. I think he's an extraordinary man.
Wow, that's an endorsement. Can we have the next slide, please?
This, by the way, this is the space that we now do our principal exhibitions in Chicago. It's on Carroll Street in the West Loop area. And it will open a show of Torkwase Dyson tomorrow The space actually was just doubled in size, and so she'll be the first artist to use the whole space. This is Jim Dine. This was our opening exhibition in this gallery in 2017.
Now, your dad trained as an architect. Did he ever practice?
Never. I mean, he always meddled in design, but he never practiced. Actually, if you have a second, a very funny story. He was close friends with Stanley Tigerman and did an exhibition that Tigerman curated in the gallery in the 1970s. Tigerman later designed one of my dad's galleries. And some years later, my dad wanted to renovate a house that the family owns in Michigan, and he invited Stanley to redesign it. Stanley did an extensive redesign of the house, and then for whatever reason, they didn't start work on the changes for about a year. When my dad finally got to work on doing the renovations, he didn't call Stanley back because he had some ideas of his own. And when the job was finished, after a couple of years, he invited Stanley and his wife to come see it, and you could see him getting redder and redder as he walked around the house, and realized that his plan had not been fully realized. He said very loudly to my dad, "You don't need an architect." I think that was the end of a long friendship.
Oh my gosh. Did you ever show his drawings?
That I think that his drawings were included in the show that they did together in the 70s. That was before my time, but
Got it. And Jim Dine, I'm guessing you came to Jim Dine kind of late.
uh, well, no, actually. Richard started showing Jim Dine in 76, I think, before I joined the gallery. Um, I mean, at the time, he was one of the principal members of that generation. He's one of the only ones still living and working right now. In
Oh my
fact,
God.
just had a major survey show in Venice this past summer.
And did you show his sculpture?
Yeah, we've always shown all aspects of his work, although I would say I'm probably the most drawn to his works on paper. He's an incredible draftsman. His figure drawings and his botanical drawings are second to none.
Wow, that's a real endorsement. Um, can we have the next slide?
So this is the roof at the Whitney. This is a work that Torkwase Dyson did for the Whitney Biennial this past year, and they've decided to keep it up for a year. I guess because the work was very ambitious to produce, and they wanted to take advantage of that possibility. Dyson will open a show, our first show with her actually in Chicago tomorrow, although we've represented her for nearly 5 years now. She came to us with a fully drafted virtual plan for an exhibition in our space. She was that taken by the space. And she shared that with us within a matter of weeks of joining the gallery. And we had planned to do that exhibition, which would have been one of the most ambitious ones we've ever done. It included a reflecting pool and cantilevered platforms. And then what started happening for her is she started being invited to participate in biennials all over the world, 2 or 3 per year for the last 4 years. And so little by little, it became clear that a gallery exhibition wasn't as pressing as participating in those shows. So that's why we're just having a show now after nearly 5 years.
And are her works always black?
Predominantly, although sometimes they involve a lot of color beneath, just beneath the surface. You don't really sense it until you spend time with it and your eyes adjust. And you can see that, for instance, there are deep blues in this piece also, but you don't see them unless the light is just right and unless you spend some time with the work. think there might be a close-up slide.
It's a beautiful work. I'm a big fan of this.
Yeah, there you go. You can sense a little bit of that bluish cast in the painting that appears on the vertical surface in the background.
And is she going to show big constructions with you?
She's showing large constructions as well as some very intimate small sculptures, only 10 or 12 inches high, that she made from cast glass. She's really fascinated with the way the glass absorbs and distributes light. And then there are also some paintings similar to the paintings that you see on these vertical surfaces.
Wow. Um, can we have the next, please?
This is Theaster Gates, an artist that we've represented for nearly 15 years now, I think. Theaster, I met through my wife, Dee, almost 20 years ago, I think. At the time, he was a landscape architect and ceramic potter who worked for the University of Chicago and part-time for the city doing urban planning. And he had just begun to think of of his practice as possibly including making fine art. And over the years, he's melded a complex practice which still involves a lot of urban architecture, urban planning, programmatic, contextualization of his work, and reviving areas of cities that have been underinvested in for decades, along with sculpture and ceramics. He just had an exhibition at the Mori Museum in Tokyo, and it was comprised mostly of ceramics, like the pot that you see in the background on this platform.
And he's primarily identified with Chicago.
He lives there and he grew up there.
Do you show many Chicago artists?
It's never been a central focus of the gallery, no. But we always have represented at least a couple of artists from Chicago. As I said, the gallery has a very eclectic taste and focus, and it's broad ranging, and it reflects the things that we're passionate about wherever they come from. Yeah, I would say my father never really articulated this, but I can, I think. I can say that, we try to subscribe to the Proustian ethos that art alone is something that can allow you to see the world as others see it, to empathize with your fellow human being. It has a special capacity for that. Proust said it much better than that. And so I think, we are looking for artists who work on, multiple levels, who have an intellect sufficient, to develop the conceptual side of their work, and who have visual acuity and make skills of a maker that create fabulous objects. Like I think there's some art that just beautifully melds both the conceptual and the visual. And we try to focus on artists who have that magic. This is a David Hockney show. It was a survey of several years of his paintings, a look back, actually.
But
This was in our gallery at the Hancock in Chicago about a decade ago.
But bringing up Hockney, I mean, I went to Chicago to see one of his operas.
Was that Turandot?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's one of my favorite operas.
We started showing Hockney around the time that I joined the gallery, I think in '82. At the time, he was working on photo collages, and he was developing this sense of, trying to push back against the limitations of photography by combining multiple points of view with collaging photographs.
And that's a Hockney behind you.
Yeah, that's a painting of the Grand Canyon. And it comes, although it was painted in the '90s, it comes directly out of those works, those photo collages from the '80s, because he first made photo collages on a visit to the Grand Canyon, I think in '81 or '82. And he took pictures from different perspectives of the same scene and pieced them together. And it had this remarkable way of communicating time as well as perspective, and color and form, of course, because the photographs were not all taken at the same second. Like a single photograph is a one-point perspective. It captures only an instant, and it captures only a single point of view. And it's translated through a lens in that way. But if you combine photographs, you can combine the element of time too. So for instance, one of his photo collages involved people playing a Scrabble game. And he made the collage over the period of about a half an hour. So you have a sense that you're seeing more than just a brief moment captured. But your mind is required, to absorb that and to understand what you're looking at.
But also the flowers behind you.
That's David Hockney too, yeah.
Yeah.
He hasn't, I don't think he's ever said this or been quoted saying it, but he often has come back to still lifes of cut flowers or plants, generally not living ones, but cut plants, as a kind of cathartic exercise, when he's feeling grief or loss. In the '80s, like many, artists, particularly queer artists, he lost a lot of friends to AIDS. And that's when he started painting still life.
I didn't realize that. That's kind of amazing.
This picture that we're looking at now is an exhibition of Hockney's work that involved video and iPad painting and printing. What we're looking at is 3 of the 4 seasons rendered on multiple video screens, and he filmed them while moving through the landscape with 9 cameras mounted to the front of a car.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, it's rather extraordinary. I mean, if you stand in the midst of these 4 panels, you truly have the sense of having been there, of having felt it and experienced it. You almost expect a snowflake to fall on you.
Wow, too much. And will you continue to show Hockney?
As long as he continues to make work, yes. He's one of the most incredible relationships I've been able to form in my time in the art world. If I'm feeling, energized, I want to go share it with him. If I'm feeling a need, for perspective, I want to go gain that by spending time with him. He's got an extraordinarily sharp mind. He can recall bits from books that he read 40 years ago. Very interesting man.
Too much. I wasn't aware of these works.
Well, he has shown them. I think actually the Met, when they did their last retrospective about a decade ago, showed this very piece, The Four Seasons.
Wow. Can we have the next one, please?
These are, those were works that he created on on iPads.
which
He,
is astonishing.
he took, he scanned in with electronic scanning equipment each of the elements that you see in each one of these compositions. So for instance, the painting on the wall on the very far right, the one leaning up against the wall, he scanned that electronically into a digital file, and he combined it with scans of each of the other elements that you see there. And then he, using a stylus and an iPad, he created the environment that all those pieces are rendered in with a freehand drawing, but using samples of the textures and the colors and things like that, and adding his own shadows to give a sense of where light comes from. And then one by one, he took those digital files and he placed them in that space. So the space doesn't really exist except virtually, and in these printed he calls them drawings, iPad drawings, because they're fully fabricated in his mind.
It's called talent.
I mean, the big difference is that you could never see, each one of these scans sees the object from 360 degrees on all sides. So all that information is there. If you were standing in a room like this, you would not be able to have all that much data because you'd have to move around the room to see things from the back and the sides and the top. And you know, you can only stand in one place at one time. But these fabricated views see each object from multiple points of view and then render them all on a flat surface. It's kind of extraordinary, especially for an artist who's well into his 80s to be making work as experimental and pushing as many boundaries as he does.
Oh my God, absolutely. So the next up is Rashid Johnson, another artist I identify with Chicago.
Rashid grew up in Chicago, and in fact, my wife and I met him when he was about 19 or 20, I think. He was in school at either at Columbia College or maybe already in grad school at the Art Institute. His mother is a political activist, and we met her through some political campaign, I don't remember. And she said, "Oh, my son's an artist, you should meet him."
Oh my God, that is how you met him.
If you're a gallerist, you've heard that quite a few times, and you tend to be skeptical. But I did. I visited him in a vacant storefront studio that he had at the time on South Michigan Avenue, south of the Art Institute. And there was really nothing in there except a large view camera and piles and piles of either discarded or completed or half-finished photographs all over the floor. But when he started to talk to me about how he made them and what drove him, we became immediately drawn to his work and started collecting it. I don't know. I suppose I probably bought one of those works off the floor, and it was a portrait of a homeless man who had wandered by the studio one day, and the door was open, and Rashid invited him in and photographed him. And we still have that photograph.
And do you have like Anxious Men?
We do. We own work from, I mean, Dee and I own personally work from almost every period in his career. We've been buying and collecting it. And we've given some to museums too. When the Museum of Contemporary Art, I think, did the first museum show for him in around the late 90s, maybe it was the mid 90s even. We helped support that show and gave them their first piece. We later gave a work to the Art Institute, and I've given a few as tributes to curators who I liked and who liked his work and passed away in different museums around the country. He and his wife remain really close friends.
I'm a
And
huge fan.
the gallery doesn't officially represent him, but we have done a couple of exhibitions, and we continue to try to place works for him periodically with collectors that, we have special influence with.
How about his new sculptures? They're astonishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's, and again, I think he's an artist who has helped us to see the world through fresh eyes. And uh, that's something to be remarked on, I think.
Absolutely. What do we have coming up? Oh, Alex Katz.
Alex is one of the artists I brought to the gallery, like Rashid. I visited him. Well, frankly, I don't really know why my dad never did a show with him, because they knew each other for a long time. I don't know, maybe my dad didn't respond to his work the way he did others of his generation. Like, he showed Roy Lichtenstein and Jim Dine and other artists of that generation. But I went to visit him once in the, I guess it was probably the very late 80s or early 90s, and I was really taken with him as a human being. Also brilliant, acerbic wit, very knowledgeable, and very interested in the works of younger artists. At the time, he seemed old to me, and now he's 97. He's truly old. But we started showing him, around the beginning of the 90s, and have done an exhibition about every third year since then. This is a work that was actually created before we started representing him, and he hung on to it for quite some time. And a collector client of ours in Los Angeles many years ago wanted to make a gift of a work by Alex Katz to LA MoCA. No, I think it was the Los Angeles County Museum, if I'm not mistaken. And I convinced Alex that this was the sort of painting that should be in that collection. He let us sell it to that collector who gave it to the museum.
I'd love to see it with an Eric Fischel.
That painting was loaned to Alex's retrospective at the Guggenheim a couple of years ago. I think that's the last time it's been seen in New York. This is a more recent exhibition from last summer, I believe, in our Chicago space. An exhibition of paintings mainly focused on the subject of autumn. All the studies for these were done in Maine, where he lives in the summers. And then the paintings were mostly painted in his New York studio in the fall.
Ah.
In winter.
And you get to live with these.
Yeah. For a time while they're in the gallery before they go off to different parts of the world. And then, we collect too. So we own several works by Alex.
That's the part of being an art dealer that I find absolutely astonishing, that you get to see the work every day when you walk in the gallery.
Yeah, it will be more than a month since I've been in Chicago, and I'm going tomorrow for Torkwase Dyson's opening. And I won't have, this is one exhibition I won't have participated in installing, so I'm really anxious to walk in there fresh and see the space reinvented by her.
Too much. Has Alex, has Alex made many weather-based works?
Landscape and trees and flowers and things like that probably make up more than half of his work. It's not the work that he's best known for. He's best known for portraits and probably for environmental multiple figure portraits from the 70s. That's when his reputation was cemented. But he makes more paintings of landscape than he does of figures.
Oh, that I didn't realize.
We've shown both.
too much. Uh, it's pretty exciting what's coming up. The next one.
Oh, oh yes. I'm probably closer to this artist than any artist that I've worked with. We were born only about 4 months apart, and we've worked together now for more than 30 years, and our careers have been roughly parallel, in terms of growth of growth and success. Plensa lives and works in Barcelona, and so it means that I've been to Barcelona dozens of times over the years. When we started showing him, he had really no audience in the United States at all, and in fact, but he was quite actively shown and collected in Europe already. This was in his 30s, and it took 3 or 4 years for him to develop, a body of work large enough for us to show in the States. And we did a show for him in Chicago, I think about 94, maybe just exactly 30 years ago, something like that. In the beginning, most of the works that we sold went to people in and around the Chicago area and in the Midwest. But in '99, when the city was preparing to build and dedicate a park for the millennium, there were 3 or 4 opportunities in that park, which is right downtown next to the Art Institute, for artists to work. And they had several families who became patrons for those individual works. One of the families was the Crown family. And the Crowns had a number of people offering them advice at the time, but they ultimately selected 3 or 4 artists to make proposals. And because one of the people on the committee had seen Plensa's show at the Jeu de Paume in Paris a few months before, we were able to convince them to consider an artist who was completely unknown to them. And Plensa made this very compelling presentation for a fountain, which is something that the Crown family really wanted. But it was a fountain unlike any that they had ever seen before. And they were completely captivated by the idea, and ultimately spent close to $20 million realizing a work by a virtually unknown artist. And that work had a lot to do with the early building of Plensa's career. He started showing in New York not long afterwards, and has had museum shows now around the world.
In Millennium Park, those are the giant portraits that a water escapes from the mouths.
Yes. Yeah, that was his first time rendering the human figure in a representational way, and he chose to use materials. I mean, he chose conceptually, he wanted to work with water in the way that water occurs in nature, primarily, which is falling down rather than shooting up. At the time, every fountain that was being built involved jets of water shooting up in the air, and the idea was to surprise and delight. Plensa was not that interested in that. He was more interested in the properties of the materials that were inherent to the material. And water doesn't tend to shoot up in nature; it tends to fall down. So he produced these towers where water was pumped up and falls down along the sides. And he collaborated with students at the School of the Art Institute to go out and film 1,000 faces of people that represented the community of the time, and he incorporated them in the way that people, let's say in ancient Rome, used gargoyles. He decided to make the residents of Chicago from all backgrounds and races and ages the gargoyles of his fountain, and render them in a very contemporary material video.
And I haven't. He's Spanish.
Yes, Catalan. These are a couple of recent large commissions. The one that we're looking at now is on the Hudson River front, right across from the Whitney Museum in Jersey City.
So
About 80 feet tall, that piece.
can you see it from the Whitney?
Yes.
Oh my God, I have to go see it.
The one before that is is a very interesting work. It's actually the first major relief sculpture that he created in his career. It's in a room designed by Todd Williams and Billy Chen in the new Welcome Center at the Meyer Sculpture Park in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That room is almost 100 feet square and about 60 feet tall. And those faces are rendered in fairly deep relief. Hold on just one sec, please. Sorry. Uh, they're rendered in carved marble, about 100 tons of it.
Oh,
Uh, he went to Vietnam to choose the marble, had it shipped to Barcelona, carved it there, and it was shipped by sea to Grand Rapids during the pandemic and installed in time to open there about 2 years ago, right at the end of the pandemic. Kind of
that
an
that's
extraordinary
kind
film.
of bucket list.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
I mean, it's a dream for an artist to have patrons that trust the artist enough to give them those kind of spaces, those kind of budgets to work with. It's a huge risk. I mean, the developer of that property where the 80-foot tall piece is that we saw before, he's a man in his 70s who's built literally probably thousands of buildings in his career. Very successful. But this was the first time he'd worked directly with an artist for a commission, and it was interesting the way that uh, he acknowledged this vulnerability that he felt giving an artist that kind of space to work with. Um, because I guess it's like, when a star decides to go to the Academy Awards wearing a particular fashion designer's work. Suppose that it turns out that the fashion designer is a womanizer or abusive, and then the reputation of the star is painted with that broad brush. It's the same way when patrons put works of art in the public space. Maybe even more compelling because the work stays there virtually forever. And the people that enjoy it and that come into contact with it didn't ask for it. It was just plunked down in their space, the public space. So an artist like Plensa, who has so successfully, so consistently over a 35-year career, managed to connect with the public in a meaningful way, they must have something that all of us don't have.
If we go back to Jersey City, um, I always feel when I see his sculpture that there's something exaggerated about it.
Well, it's easy to think that when you're looking at the scale of this work. But do you mean perspective or, I mean, it is stretched. There's no doubt about that. And he does use lenses to capture images. He uses digital scanning also. This is a portrait of an actual woman that he scanned. And then he sculpted her in the computer by stretching and modeling and changing things to create a more of an iconic feel, something that feels less specific as a portrait and more universal as an image. to communicate something conceptual. But ultimately, it can be traced back to images captured by lenses. And so that perspective that we're used to seeing in photography is present in his work.
Well, you make me want to go down to the Whitney to see this.
If you really want to see it well, you should hop on the ferry and go over to, there's a ferry terminal right next to this piece. It's a fun ride.
Oh my gosh, that sounds wonderful.
This doesn't really show it from this angle, but if you were to look at it from the New York side, you'd see an entire community behind it, buildings and parks. I think this photo was taken before that park was completed on that pier also. So there's now a lush green park all around it.
And you get to eat at the Whitney in a Rashid Johnson.
Exactly.
Too much.
And see the Torquasi Dyson on the Hyundai Terrace on the 5th floor.
Well, this is a win-win situation. Um,
The art world is a place of synergy, I think. I think we all gain energy from being around each other, the institutions, the artists, the curators, the critics, the dealers, and the collectors. It's kind of a remarkable community, and it's grown truly global in the last 30 years.
are you surprised?
No, not really, because the demographics of the world and the societies that have that have inculcated advanced education among an entirely new middle and upper middle class in the last 30 years. I mean, people call out for meaning in their lives. And some of those people, for sure, are going to find that meaning in artistic expression, whether it's visual or musical, literary. I mean, we celebrate artists for decades, centuries, and millennia because they really do they do leave something behind that not all of us can leave behind.
Oh my God, I hope so. Because yesterday was certainly one of the most depressing days of my life.
Mm.
Let's see. And I'm supposed to ask you about a justice committee that you're part of.
Oh, maybe you're thinking of Human Rights Watch.
Exactly.
Yeah, I serve on their board. It's a global NGO based in New York nominally, but about half of our staff are in countries all over the world. It does research into human rights violations of all kinds, and documents abuses, publishes reports, and uses those reports to do advocacy among governmental organizations and in the public to try to change policy and improve lives.
That's that we're gonna need that for the next 4 years.
I mean, my wife and I have been involved for about 15 years, I think, and the need for it has only grown every year. Faster, the need is growing faster than our ability to raise money and hire and train and oversee. Not quite sure why that is.
What?
Human beings are a very special species.
So can we have the next, please? Post-war.
But
Okay.
the next group of slides include post-war American, European modern, and abstract expressionism and pop art, which have made up a significant part of the gallery's activities over the years, both exhibitions and sales. There was a time actually when our business was nearly 80% so-called secondary market, where we would either buy and resell or take works on consignment like the auction houses do and resell for private collectors and museums. We still do quite a bit of that, but as the market has grown globally, its focus has changed really from connoisseurship style of collecting historical things that require people to invest some time and to have a desire to learn enough to be able to distinguish between one work of art and another. That's different from collecting contemporary art, where most people seem to be driven by trends and by the things that they're seeing exhibited all around them. And people generally want the same thing. They don't want things that are different. And that has characterized the growth of the contemporary art market in the last 30 years. Our business is now roughly, it has flipped entirely from 80% historical to 80% primary market contemporary artists. So things like this make up a decreasing share of the objects that we work with now. But still, we've helped to build some extraordinary collections, and we've been blessed to be able to handle some things that any museum would want. And these are some examples.
It's a beautiful Basquiat. Can we have the next, please?
This again is that Calder that I mentioned that was in the show in the New York Gallery earlier this year.
Is it mountains?
Yes, it's called Clouds Over Mountains. Those little white objects in the background are meant to convey a sense of clouds floating over the mountains.
Oh my God, I'd love to see it. Can we have the next, please? Incredible. Um, Calder had a show at the Guggenheim in, I don't know, in the 60s, and my sister and I went to Pearls to buy a little sculpture for $200.
Mm. For
Those
those who don't know, Pearls is the gallery that was in the building right next door to us on Madison Avenue. They were there for almost 40 years.
those days are gone. $200 Alexander Calders.
He had a basement full of Calders. I visited there once. Yeah, I think it was even before I started in the art business. My dad took me there to visit once.
Oh, that must have been astonishing.
Yeah. Old school dealers like that often bought the inventories that they had. They would make commitments to artists to buy basically all of their work. Ernst Beiler was like that too in Basel, Switzerland. The first time I visited him, he took me into a room that must have had 100 Dubuffets in the rack. Just started pulling them out one after another.
You're kidding. That's why the Byler collection is fantastic.
There's
Um,
pictures there. We should probably move through more of them.
yeah. Can we have the next, please? Okay, so there's an incredible story on the internet about how your dad sold false start.
Actually, it was me, not him.
Oh, you sold it.
Yes. The collector who owns this work now, who I helped acquire it, I think this was maybe 16, 18 years ago, something like that. He he, he knew of Jasper John's work, but that really wasn't his focus. He was interested in Jackson Pollock, and it's not easy to acquire mature drip paintings by Jackson Pollock. And at the time, there was one collector who owned four of them, named David Geffen in Los Angeles. And I've done business with David Geffen over the years. In fact, in some ways, he doesn't know it, but he might be responsible for me deciding to go into the art business instead of staying in theater, which is what I was doing before that. Anyway, that's another story for a different day. I called Geffen and asked him if I could bring this collector out to visit him to see his collection, and particularly because he was interested in Pollock. And Geffen sells from time to time too, so it wasn't just a field trip to look at the collection. So we flew out there and we went to visit David with the collector and his wife, and we sat, we looked at the collection and we sat down for a cup of coffee at the breakfast table. And this painting, False Start, which is quite large, it must be a little over 6 feet tall, was hanging on the wall behind Geffen and opposite where my client was sitting. And he was just like transfixed looking at this painting. He'd never seen anything more compelling than that. When we left, the first thing he said to me in the car was, "What was that?" And this collector, like some of the very best ones that I've ever worked with, has the capacity to be truly moved by extraordinary works of art and isn't afraid to show it. He is in touch with his spontaneous side. And a conversation and a negotiation ensued, and in a matter of about 2 days, this $80 million painting changed hands.
I love it. It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And he lends it all the time. I mean, it was on view at the Art Institute for nearly 10 years. It's been in all the retrospectives, and I think it's now hanging on loan at the Norton Museum in Palm Beach.
I love it. Can we have the next, please? Well, another great artist.
Mhm. I could tell you a story about all these paintings, but we don't have to tell a story about everyone.
Can we have the next, please? So did you get to meet Richter?
I've met him a couple times, but we don't have a relationship. I met him first when he did a show at the Art Institute in Chicago about 20 years ago. The exhibition was called, oh heck, no, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, that's when I had seen his work, obviously, before that, but never had a chance to meet him. He didn't strike me as the warmest character, so we never developed a relationship.
But I'm going to tell this really weird story. I usually don't tell stories when I'm having a conversation like this. But in the summer of 1970, I was in Richter's studio and I saw these gray paintings and they were terrible. They were so beyond bad. And then he became more and more famous. And I could never figure out how I saw these terrible gray paintings.
Well,
And
not every day is a good day for
well,
anyone.
I figured out when I went to an art fair down on the docks that I decided I bet he destroyed those gray paintings. And somebody told me to check his catalog raisonné, and son of a gun, he destroyed those paintings. Then I was told I was very lucky because no one ever gets to see the paintings he destroys, but they were terrible. So, anyway, that's a kind of crazy story. Can we have the next, please?
So,
Well, there we go. One of the great artists of my generation.
and unsung too, I would say, underappreciated. I mean, she's known almost entirely for a body of work that she painted over the course of 2 years in the mid 70s, and these paintings are from that series. Although she had a very long career and produced lots of other amazing work.
It's true. It's
I,
one unsung and the horse paintings they stay with her.
We bought and sold quite a few of the paintings from this series in the secondary market over the decades, and I had always wanted to do a show of them when she was alive, but didn't quite make it. So this show opened in 2021 in Chicago and then traveled to New York. These all paintings were all borrowed from private collections.
Fabulous.
There's
Uh,
one more slide of this show. Yeah. Yeah, the one on the left, I think, came from the Hirshhorn.
Incredible. Do we have another slide?
This is an estate that we represent, Leon Polk Smith, part Native American. Uh,
Can we have the next?
again, Leon Polk Smith.
Beautiful space. And you've
This
already
this
mentioned Bob Thompson.
this artist deserves a lot more attention. He was one of the artists that my father visited in New York in 1963, and later did 3 exhibitions for him in the 60s while he was still alive. But he died very young. Probably most people know that by now. I think he died in 1965 or 6. African American, very influenced by European painting, quite influential to 2 or 3 generations of artists of color who have followed him. And we continue to be active in his work in the secondary market.
And Dick Bellamy was a big supporter.
That introduction could have been made on that first visit to New York too in the 60s. I don't know. Funny questions like this keep coming up since my dad passed away in 2018 that I'd like to ask him.
I love it. Can we have the next, please?
And these are some examples of major European modern pictures that we have dealt in over the years.
Oh my God, you got to live with that Cezanne?
Yeah, actually, I still live with it. It's a screen saver on my iPad,
Totally understand.
but it will resurface one of these days in a museum that hasn't yet opened.
I love it. I can't wait. A gorgeous Dubuffet.
Mhm.
And next,
This is also Dubuffet.
another great one. Another great Giacometti. I think we're coming to the end because we're going to
This
open
this
questions.
painting I'll mention. We sold this painting in 2000 to a woman who had just sold her cosmetics empire and started collecting modern and contemporary art. Um, she, in the course of like 2 years, she built an extraordinary collection, of really first-rate things. She bought from us a Picasso of this period also, and this Leger, and a couple of other works of contemporary art, including Plensa, for a huge house that she built in Palm Beach. Her estate is selling this work this week or next week at Sotheby's. So it's come back on the market after 24 years.
And it could still be done, that you could still build up a great collection.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to collect much like this today. Um, but there are not nearly as many people who focus on that sort of collecting today either. So maybe the competition is less, but the supply is much less.
Exactly. I think we have a fantastic Picasso coming up.
A
Ah,
couple of them, maybe 3, yes. These next 3 works are works that are all in a single collection. We acquired this one privately and the next 2 at auction for this collector in the 90s. That collection was being formed starting around 86, and we worked with them for about the 20-year period during which they were collecting.
if we go back to the one just before, I swear I once graded Robert Rosenblum's exams, and this was on the exam.
Yeah, this is a very famous picture. Belonged to Madeline Haas before it was sold at auction in the 90s. She was a big collector in San Francisco in the 50s and 60s. And I think she died in the mid-90s. This painting came up for auction at that time, and it was a record price for Picasso, something on the neighborhood of $50 million, I think.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Can we have the next uh the next one?
Yeah.
Okay. So classic de Kooning.
Yeah, and this is an artist that we did work with during his lifetime also. The last show we did with him was of the paintings he made in the 80s, those sort of what are sometimes called ribbon paintings. I don't think I have a picture of one here, but my father started including de Kooning's work in exhibitions that he did in secondary market drawings, mostly in the 60s, and ultimately met de Kooning, I think, in the 70s and did a couple of exhibitions with him then. I only worked on the one in the 80s, in the late 80s.
Too much. This is pretty fabulous. And we have another de Kooning, I think.
Yeah, this
Or
is an extraordinary painting from the 70s, kind of transitional, just as he was getting ready to start making those more minimalist ribbon paintings.
can
And
we, oh,
exceptional.
can
Yeah.
we
Okay.
have 64, the Roy Lichtenstein
Oh yeah.
classic?
Yeah. This painting we acquired actually. It it failed to sell at auction about 10 or 15 years ago, and it was guaranteed. So the owner of the auction house ended up owning it. And over the course of 3 or 4 months, I convinced him that he had way overpaid for it. And ultimately, our client was able to acquire it for significantly less than the guarantee.
That's pretty special.
It's a standalone painting. I mean, so few paintings of this series are in private collections still, that when they come up at auction, they tend to always be guaranteed, and they tend to always be over guaranteed because, people, I mean, the auction houses want to represent works so badly from this period. But the truth is, there aren't that many people who are willing to pay 20, 30, 40% above the evident market to get a work. And typically those kind of transactions happen privately, not at auction. So it's been a fool's errand trying to sell paintings of this type at auction generally.
Wow. Paul, I think we're gonna open up to questions, but this is we've seen so many astonishingly magnificent works of art. Thank you. This has been a delight. Um,
Love to take questions.
yeah, I think we have questions.
Thank you both so much. It was so wonderful to hear about the legacy of the gallery, Paul. And such amazing questions, Phyllis. Thank you so much. I have the first question. I was very curious about how, if at all, your work with the Human Rights Watch has influenced your practice as a gallerist.
Hmm. No one's ever asked me that question. I don't know if I have an answer to that, really. I think probably the most, maybe I do. I mean, my work with Human Rights Watch has come relatively recently in the last decade, which is also the decade in which, I'm growing increasingly more focused on things outside of being an art dealer, frankly. I've been doing it for 40 years. And it's not that I don't still find it thrilling. I just also feel that it's someone else's turn, and I'm enjoying the process of mentoring younger people in the business and recognizing that the kind of relationships that a gallery has to make on a daily basis with new clients and new artists are the kind of relationships that need to be husbanded over decades. And I'm probably not going to do that. I want to do some other stuff. And Human Rights Watch is one of those things. So maybe it has hastened my move into what they call in the law business of counsel.
Thank you for that answer, Paul. And then we have one last question from Fong.
Thank you. Thank you, Mackley. Paul, thank you for the fabulous conversation with Phyllis. You mentioned that your early life as being involved in theater. And, not long ago, I reread Herzog, where, I think it was the time he just moved to New York, but he came back a lot to Chicago, so bellow. And I always loved the beginning line, Herzog, if I'm out of my mind, it's all right with me. You remember that opening line? 1964. And we have a lot of friends from Chicago. But in having interviewed Juliet Malina talk about great deal about living theater, how she and Julian, her late husband Julian Beck, founded in the late 40s. Really, it's radical. So Chicago have a very serious history of radical theater too, just as vibrant in New York. And I wonder, when you began undertaking your own involved theater, what was the informative, the beginning of it all? What was the passion of theater that eventually turned into your following the path that your father have, created as a gallerist?
Well, my mother used to really love Gilbert and Sullivan.
Okay.
And, she took us, my brother and sister and I, to see every Gilbert and Sullivan performance at this theater at the University of Chicago, which is the neighborhood we grew up in, Hyde Park in Chicago. So, as a kid, musical theater was, and kind of extraordinary musical theater really was something we were exposed to a lot. But the first time I actually stepped backstage, which is where I found, the real magic, was working in a barn theater during a summer. Probably I was maybe 12 or something like that, in Michigan. And I was kind of transfixed by the whole process behind the scenes, and I worked as an assistant to the stage manager that summer.
Oh.
But then, I didn't really pay much attention to theater until after college. And a friend of mine was starting a dinner theater in New Jersey and needed a partner. And he knew I had some experience building sets.
Oh, okay.
So I actually dropped out of college before I finished and spent 5 years helping build that business. And we produced, I don't know, 30 or 40 plays during those 5 years, something like that. And then I thought, well, what would be the next logical step in that world? And I got really smitten by the idea of becoming a film producer, which was probably the least intelligent choice made in my career. But I did spend a couple of years back in school studying film and trying to get a hold in that business. But I think I was, already in my probably mid-20s, and for some reason I had the idea that I shouldn't start at the bottom, and but there wasn't a space for me in the middle or at the top. And at the same time, while I was back in school, I worked for my dad on Saturdays, which was really the first time that I had spent any serious time paying attention to what he did, because I went away to school when I was 15, and he was really just getting the gallery going at that time. So I had been there once or twice, but I knew nothing about it. Those Saturdays, gave me an opportunity to see visual artists at work, and the collectors that, saw themselves as just crazy enough to risk large sums buying their work. And I was pretty captivated by that. And also, by how little bureaucracy there is in that business. in
Mhm.
this business. You know, by comparison, let's say to the movie business, where the at the time, anyways, the sums were already quite large. You couldn't make a decent commercial movie for less than $8 or $10 million, which required somebody to touch you on the shoulder and say, okay, it's your turn to get funded or to get distributed. Or whereas in the art business, you know, you could develop a passion for something and you could convey that to a collector, and you were in business. You know, very low barrier to entry. And super passionate people on in all parts of the business. The curators, the you know, the museum directors, the collectors, the artists, and the gallerists. So it just happened, not because my father or I ever intended it to. We spent about 15 years, you know, during which time our careers kind of overlapped, and I took over the business, and he moved into collecting and to doing philanthropic work himself.
Amazing. So it was a natural outgrowth,
Mhm.
and it was a passing baton with fluidity, with ease. Sometimes family business can be forced upon, you know. It can be unpleasant, Paul.
Yeah, well, this was definitely not forced on me, but it was also unpleasant for a bit. That's a story for another day.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you so much. Now I know a little bit more about you.
I appreciate you quoting the Herzog line.
Well, it's just fresh in my mind because I know that he came from there and prominent member of the avant-garde scene in
There
literature.
has been a real courageous kind of avant-garde in Chicago against the, you know, in the background as a backdrop to the work that we do. I mean, there was groups of artists like the Monster Roster, for instance.
Absolutely.
Probably, you know, could not have happened anywhere else. Just
Yeah.
like, you know, pop art probably, you know, wouldn't have grown up anywhere else besides New York, where Madison Avenue and you know, the whole commercial art scene was so predominant in the 60s.
Yep. The trilogy, you know, is on my list to read next very soon, which Joe Zucker have recommended. In fact, he bought a copy, signed copy, he sent to me. Bless his soul, who passed away last year. But Paul, this is terrific. Thank you. I'm dying to re-listen to it later. So
Thank
you
you,
so
Juan.
much.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Phyllis. I
Wonderful.
mean, I'm sure everybody on this Zoom knows it, but Fong Bui and the Brooklyn Rail are quite exceptional and extraordinary in so many ways. And I feel privileged to be able to be your friend.
Likewise, a privilege for us too. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Phyllis. And back to you, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. This has been fascinating. And we've seen so much good art.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul and Phyllis. Thank you, Susie from Gray Gallery, for your support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Victor Huebner and Lyle Rexer on Huebner's ongoing project, The Americans I Met. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
No, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Phyllis.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul.
Thanks, Phyllis. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.